My name is Luke Pownell. I'm the Communications Manager here at Westport. Today's session is going to be presented by Patrick Sears. He's the Managing Director here at Westport. So Patrick is responsible for leading the Westport program. So what to expect today? We just wanted to be really clear about what you can expect in this session. So we're going to provide detailed information about Westport and the planning to date. We're going to explain why and how the location was chosen. We're going to talk a bit about the impact to the Naval Base Horse Beach. We also want to acknowledge that we don't have all the answers yet, so we'll be as clear as we can about what we do and what we don't know. And we'll also outline the plan and commitment for working with you on options and solutions going forward. So with that in mind, I'll now hand over to Patrick. All yours, Patrick.
Thanks very much, Luke, and thanks for those of you who could join us today. Where it's always difficult at this time in the afternoon, and I also acknowledge that there has probably been a few of the horse riding community affected by the fires up north of Perth recently, and so hopefully everyone's okay and has come through that all right. And appreciate some people may be caught up in responding or reacting to that. So really happy to join you today, particularly because of the huge response we had to some of our surveys out to some of your colleagues and people who enjoy the horse beach down in Kwinana about Westport and the interest that you've shown in what we're up to. What we really want to be is very clear about the situation today and what we might do going forwards. So fundamentally, what I'll go through is the fact that the Westport has been sited on a location at Kwinana Beach, which was first identified back in 2020 and approved by the state government, but we'll come back to that in detail. And between that and the expansion of the desalination plan, it looks like the Kwinana Beach, as it relates to a place for horses to exercise and to run, will no longer be accessible going forwards. And so what we want to talk to you about is why that has come to be, and also what we need to do to work with you to make sure that there is an accessible, suitable horse beach for your community to continue to utilise, and that's made available as we go forwards towards Westport's delivery. So I'll flip through some of the background information, then we'll talk about what comes next, and then we'll answer any questions you have at this point. So first things first is why are we actually doing this project? So, 90% of everything in our houses, which isn't fresh food, comes to Western Australia on a container. The vast majority of everything that manufacturers or any business use to drive the economy in Western Australia comes to Western Australia on container. And outside of minerals and livestock and a few other things and scrap metal, the vast majority of things that our exporters export around the world exits our state through containers. So it's really important that the way containers move in and out of our state is efficient, because if it's inefficient or if it gets choked up and bottlenecked, then our exporters and the prices we pay for goods in the shops will just increase substantially. And that's a whole bunch of money that all of us are paying every day for inefficiency rather than for things we'd like to spend that money on. It's really important for us in Western Australia to have a very efficient supply chain. The map that's on the screen now sort of indicates there that we've got one gateway for all of our goods to come in and out of the western side of our continent. The only alternative to not having a good container port in Western Australia is shipping things to Brisbane, to Sydney or to Melbourne, and then sticking them on trucks or trains and then driving them across the Nullarbor to Western Australia. That would add a huge amount of cost for every single bit of good, every good that was in those containers to bring it to Western Australia, and create a lot of impact on our economy. And obviously there's a huge amount of carbon emissions and others associated with that. So it's really important that we have an efficient gateway into Western Australia. Now, Fremantle has been that gateway for 50, almost 100 years, and it's still a really well operating port. It's quite manual, but it's still quite efficient. However, what we're starting to see is that obviously it used to be an industrial area many, many years ago, and now it's become an urban and residential and tourism area. We've had development grow up around it. And what we're seeing at the moment is that the biggest constraint of Fremantle as a port and a gateway for our economy is the fact that the trucks and the trains are going to find it increasingly difficult to get in and out when you've got so many people living right around the port and, you know, around those roads and everything. So Fremantle is starting to reach its capacity. The port itself has a bit more legs, but again, even then, over the next couple of decades, it will start to become constrained, if you like, and we won't be able to bring any of the larger ships in that are going to start to come to Australia, and we won't be able to bring any more goods into Fremantle, and as I said, have to land bridge them across from the eastern states, which is just not an acceptable economic outcome for the state. So because of that, the state government back in 2017, obviously they decided not to progress with the Roe 8 development. And that really, Roe 8 as a road really would have prolonged the port, but really wouldn't have been able to set it up for the next century. So ultimately, we would have needed to find a different solution anyway. It would have added a couple of years to it. But 2017 was the decision to go and look at an alternative or the next port location for Western Australia. Between 2017 and 2020, there was canvassing of 28 different locations, and I'll get to a little bit of that in a minute, coming down to 8 shortlisted options, and then a final recommended option was identified in Kwinana. And I'll come back to why that was and why some of those other places around the state weren't chosen in a moment. Our job at the moment has been able to take that okay, there will be a port here in Kwinana, and to look at how we actually design the detailed configuration of that port, but also all the road and the rail and other connections that are required for that new supply chain to move from Fremantle to Kwinana, how that's all going to be developed in time for when Fremantle does hit its capacity, which won't be for some time yet, but a big project like this takes a long time to build, so we've had to do the planning now. And our job is to provide the state government with a business case in July, which will tell them when and how that supply chain needs to be designed and built, and when and how the ships will start to arrive in Kwinana rather than Fremantle going forwards. Government will make a decision on that. We'll give them their advice, that advice in July. It's going to go out for independent assessment by Infrastructure Australia just to make sure we've done a good job in assessing all the different options and considering why it needs to go in this location. They'll make a public report, and then the state government, we expect, will make a decision on the next steps before the end of this year. If they do decide to progress, what we'll see is from 2024 onwards, we'll start to do the further design and development of the project. And we really need at this stage, the earliest we're probably looking at is around the late 2030s as a time when the port needs to be working. But of course, the construction of the port will need to start much, much earlier than that so that we can get to that point. In terms of determining the best location, we're going to go back in time a little bit here, back to 2017-18, and when they did that work between 2018 and 2020 about looking around different locations. Western Australia is not blessed with a lot of embayments and large river mouths like there is on the eastern states, where it creates lots of protected waters for ships to be able to dock into. And also that with it means that there's not that very many areas with deep water approaching right up to the coast. So there's very few locations that we can actually look at where it was actually going to make sense for a ship to physically get in when we start to talk about the larger and larger ships which are coming to Western Australia. The other thing that you really need to do is to have 92, I think, % of containers are destined for the metropolitan area. So that's because the vast majority of our population is here, but also because when you're talking about a lot of containers, they'll come to what's called distribution centres in the metro area and get repacked into a truck for like a Woolies truck or a Coles truck, and then that truck will go to a particular regional area containing everything that's required for that shop. They won't take all the containers out to the regions. And what that means is that it's very expensive if we wanted to put a port a long way away from Perth, because you'd have to ship everything in there. You'd have to have hundreds and hundreds of kilometres of trucking it down to Perth to be unpacked where all of those containers need to go. So it's really important, in terms of how much it costs to get containers across the supply chain, that we try and position the port closest to where the demand for all the goods in the containers are. And we've done a lot of work on modelling how much that would cost the economy if we put it in different areas. And it's, obviously there's a reason why ports are near population centres everywhere around the world. And it would be dangerous for us, given that we don't have any other container ports to rely on. We only have one, to actually make a decision to do something that would buck that global trend for good reason. So what was looked at was a range of options. I mean, first of all, there was brainstorming. We looked at, you think about Geraldton or Yanship or anywhere else, Albany and those sort of things. And really that distance from where the containers and the goods needed to be was the thing that was going to preclude those. Then what we looked at is 3 real locations where it could occur. So when I say we, this is the previous project, the task force. This was in Fremantle, so extending Fremantle out into the Indian Ocean. And then creating very large transport connections through the metropolitan area to get to it. It was in Kwinana, which has been, I guess, mooted as a future port site for probably the last 40 to 50 years. This is the 3rd or 4th attempt that has been taken to put a port in this location. There's been the Fremantle Ports Authority, there's been Len Buckridge, and there's been the state now. But it was signalled right back in the plans for Perth back in the 2050s. And then there's Bunbury, which is a port, obviously for chemicals, bulk products and those sort of things, in terms of looking at what could be done in that location. And what really came out is that there's several different options in in Fremantle. And ultimately, these options really didn't meet the requirements of scalability for the next century. And a lot of that was because the road and the rail connections, it was just going to be too difficult to build. You know where there's a single rail line that goes past the Roundhouse in Fremantle and goes through that tourist area, which is sort of near the Esplanade. Duplicating that rail line would have been almost impossible, and having major road networks come in and additional bridges over the Swan River and everything that would have been required was really problematic as well. In addition to that, you are concentrating more and more industrial activity in Fremantle when you've just got housing around it and there's no industrial warehousing or anything else that you need next to ports. Around Australia, there's between 500 and 1,000 hectares of industrial land around ports so that businesses can sit next to it and the economy can thrive. And obviously that's not an option around Fremantle. Bunbury was looked at. There were some really big impacts on the Ramsar wetlands to the north of that location. Plus it was quite constrained when you start to think about the very large ships. And while all of these options will require a substantial amount of dredging, Bunbury has a basalt layer in front of it, and that would have included huge amounts of long-term blasting at a really major level, which would have been environmentally prohibitive as well. And then you're still faced with the fact that you're going to have to transport all the goods all the way to Perth. There's only one rail line, which is not that effective for it. And obviously we've got a freeway there, which does get congested. It can take more freight down there, but probably not container freight because of the need to get it all back into the Perth area. So we're left really through that process with looking at Kwinana locations. There is a document which has been published, which explains all of this, which I'm sure we can link at some point, Luke. But that's the base story for why Kwinana was looked at. When we look at Kwinana, again, this is going back away. They had only so much information. They were able to look at 8 different designs, island designs, connections off Rowley Road, light port options, and the ones off Anketel Road. Noting before that, the Fremantle Port Authority and most others had actually identified off Anketel Road as the long-term option. Now, through this process, what was identified that everything off Rowley Road would have had to cut through both Alcoa, but also cut the bottom off Mount Brown, which is a considerable environmental and heritage asset, and would have created a lot of problems by having a freight route through Rowley Road, which is now built out with a lot of urban housing. And we really don't want to recreate the problem in Fremantle by moving down to Rowley and having all those housing sort of east of Kwinana Freeway have to have a freight route through those already developed areas. The island ports were looked as prospective, but actually those islands would sit straight on top of some of the last remnant seagrass and coral reefs in Cockburn Sound and have a really substantial impact on the currents of Cockburn Sound as well, which obviously supports snapper and other species that live there. And the light port footprints in front and the heavy ones right in front of Mount Brown were identified as just not being approvable by the EPA. This is one of the only cliff systems that we have in this location. It is a regional park, and that connection into the ocean is really important. Plus, it does rely on that Rowley link. So we were left at that stage. They were left with that sort of Anketel Road solution being the best option going forwards. So that is why, if you can see here, I think there's option 23 in this chart. So the second at the bottom row, the second from the right, was effectively the option which was selected as the best location. Now, that then moved on into our program, and what our job was to do is to say, okay, that's good, that's a strategic option, but we've got to look at all of the different drivers and all of the different considerations with much more detail, get the science done, engage with the community and understand their drivers, and make sure that we've got the right thing, because we've got to build this once and we've got to build it for the next century. And we've got to make sure we balance all the pros and cons of what we've got to do. Now, we knew going into this that unfortunately you can't build something this big and without impacting on anyone. It's just not possible. But we've got to do a job of trying to minimise that. So we set ourselves these goals with the state government, that it's not just about that first goal about better trade and making it cheaper for our economy going forwards. That's a very easy, it's not easy, it's still a challenging goal, it's still a very big infrastructure. But we know that there's a huge amount of other concerns we needed to take care of, including creating jobs, including not making it too expensive for the state's budget, including thinking about the community and how we could benefit it locally and minimise the impacts on it, and obviously making it the most sustainable port. So we had this sort of in our DNA and had to look at all of these different criteria all the way through our planning process to weigh them against each other and say, okay, what's more important here? What's more important here? How do we make this work? And so that's been our decision-making process, is taking these goals forward. What that's led to is a supply chain that looks a little bit like this. So what you can see here is obviously a dredging channel, which would be required for large ships anyway, regardless of the option, whether it's in Fremantle or wherever else it would be. The ships are getting larger around the world, and if we don't have the capacity to take them, and Fremantle doesn't, then they would bypass Western Australia and we would have to pay for more expensive shuttle services from Singapore. A channel, there will be a terminal on the coast with a breakwater. We did a lot of physical mapping of waves and actions and all those sort of things to prove up that a breakwater was required to a ship to be able to unload a lot. There'll be Ankertel Road, which will be built into the major freight connection to the coast. This will take a lot of heavy freight off Thomas Road, which is near Kwinana. There will further, the first stage, there'll be widening of Kwinana and Roe. So there's, on year one, we may add about 8% traffic to those roads with the trucks going up and down them. But we'll add at least one lane, which will add at least 50% more capacity. So it will actually relieve a lot of the congestion we currently see on those roads. And then after a while, we'll build Ankertel East and then build the ring road around there as well. So there's a fair bit to Westport that we've had to go through to actually make sure that this will work for Western Australia. The things we've considered there, as I said, there's been about $13 million worth of marine science looking into the habitat that we need to protect in Cockburn Sound, the fish, the physics, how waves work and how currents flow, and how seagrass can be protected and regrown. We did a lot of work with the community to understand the values that people will love and enjoy around Cockburn Sound, and of course that was allowed us to build in the use of the beach for horse riding and horse training as part of that consideration, to make sure that was really upfront in our considerations, and a lot of the work around culture and both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal heritage as well, and those places which are important. So we've done a lot of work to make sure we've got all of the information we needed to understand the decisions we made. And ultimately, after narrowing down 30 different port options down to 8 at this location and down to 3, these were the 3 final options that we were able to sort of say, this is going to be the best option for the state. It balances the cost, it balances the economic benefit to the state, and it balances the environment impacts on the wider community and recreational uses of Cockburn Sound. I won't go through it in too much detail. Option A is much closer to what came out of the 2020 piece of work to say this is what it should look like. Option C was more perpendicular, which had a bit of cost benefit, but it was probably worse for the environment and for snapper and other things. And option G is the one which has been selected, which moves the whole port to the south to move the breakwater and the port off the seagrass meadows and away from Synergy's power plants, so we don't end up with risking our power generation and blackouts during construction, which is a major consideration. There's a whole range of other reasons why these options, as you can imagine, were shortlisted and why option G was selected, but that's really the important one. I think for yourselves, obviously what's as important here is you can see that all 3 of these options would have compromised the horse beach. We understand from speaking to some of you and your colleagues is that we need sort of to be thinking about several hundred to 400 metres for racehorses to run up and down. We need a good access with large parks and large turning basins so you can get the floats in and out. And there's a range of other considerations we've heard from you that we're thinking about, and we'll explore with you further. That would have meant that even with option C and a little bit of option G, we have our port, and then you have Synergy and Water Corporation expanding as well. And all of these mean that access to that beach would be truncated. So, I mean, I can only apologise. We do consider everything we have. We've tried to minimise as much impact on as many stakeholders as we can. Unfortunately, as I said, something of this size means that there will be someone impacted. And obviously, in this situation, this beach is actually compromised. This is just getting into that a little bit more detail. You can see in the aqua there, the Naval Base Horse Beach. So while we have moved the port to the south from the 2020 version, which covered the whole thing, the requirement for a second desal plant to make sure Perth doesn't run out of water is going to mean that that area is going to be built out as well. And there is really no easy access route to that location. And we really can't mix, even if there was a beach there, we couldn't really mix horse floats with double B container trucks and rail access and everything into that location as well. A port is a pretty closed off, secure location and environment. So what we wanted to talk a little bit, and Luke will jump in a second, but what we really wanted to do is to sort of lay that out for you, and so you can have an understanding of why at a high level, why the port is where it is, and unfortunately why it's going to compromise the horse beach. We've been speaking to you and some of your colleagues, and I know there's lots of others who, we've had the advice that not everyone's on internet and all of these sort of things. But we're reaching out through surveys and a few other things that Luke will go on to, because what we really want to do now is to start to talk to you more about, okay, this beach is going to be compromised, but we understand the value for a very large sector of the community and a very important sector of the community in terms of the horse riding community need access to a beach with a set of very special circumstances in terms of shallowness, no dogs, all those things you've identified, that we need to work through with you and planning agencies and local governments to make sure that you continue to have access to an appropriate part of the coastline for you to be able to bring your horses down and enjoy the ocean going forwards. I know that won't replace, and we've got some messages here where people are sort of saying we've been coming here for 35, 40 years, and I know that can't replace that tie that people will have to this location. But unfortunately, it's unavoidable. And so what we really want to do is to work with you guys to understand the specifications of what's necessary so we can try and find the next location for a horse beach to be established. But Luke, did you want to touch a little bit on the next steps?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Pat. I guess before we get to any questions that the group might have, there's a number of ways that you can get in contact with us or provide feedback. We're going to be down at the beach this Friday and Saturday mornings. We'll be there between 7 and 10. Someone did mention to us, don't bring a marquee, so we won't bring a marquee. You can phone us on 1-800-875-000 if you want to talk. If you'd rather talk to us, if you'd rather just send an email, you can reach us at inquiries@westport.wa.gov.au. Alternatively, you can complete our survey. We'd love as many as possible to complete this survey. I think so far we've had about 330 responses, which is a massive response. This is really just helping us understand how you use the Naval Base Horse Beach. So once the survey closes at the end of May, we'll publish the findings around mid-year, and then we'll be using those findings to shape the engagement that's going to kick off later this year. It'll likely go into 2025 and probably beyond. And that's where we're really going to dig into what are the opportunities and what are the solutions. So I know going back, there was one question from Kirsten in the group where she was asking a little bit about, why can't Geraldton and Esperance work as an alternative location for a port? Pat probably did touch on that to some extent, just talking about, the cost of transporting things back to your metropolitan populations. There's the carbon side of it as well. Kirsten, I guess if there's any other follow-up questions there, just add to that in the text. I guess I'm thinking, Pat, something that might be helpful is just to give a sense of timing for the group. Westport can you give us a sense of Westport's timing and perhaps what that might mean for the horse beach?
Yeah. So just to go forward, so I think there was the state government identified in 2020 that this would be where a land-backed port at this location would be sited. So that decision was made back in 2020. In terms of the timing, what I can say is that the earliest it's likely to be up and running, as I said, is the late 2030s. However, government will make a decision as part of the business case about when they actually want this port to be up and running, and that'll be weighing up a whole range of things, including the cost, how long it takes to construct, how fast they want to have this development to help the economy around the Western Trade Coast evolve, and to have the redevelopment opportunity in Fremantle. But I think if we take the end of the 2030s, and I think the Deputy Premier announced mid to late 2030s as a working timelines, before the business case. The reality is the construction would need to begin relatively soon. So we've referred it to the EPA, the project to the EPA now. That will then be assessed by the EPA if the government decides to proceed, probably next year. The full public environmental review with a 8 to 12 week comment period will start in the middle of next year. We expect that to go for a couple of years after that point, at which case we'd really start to develop, to construct the project after that point. So I'd say the late 2020s, mid to late 2020s is when we could sort of start to think about, okay, this is when there's going to start to be challenges in accessing the beach. But again, that is all just a supposition. We have that construction strategy we're still working on. The government still hasn't made a decision on the timing. I'm just trying to be as open in terms of a realistic scenario that could be considered.
Okay, thanks, Pat. Just while we give it another minute or two to see if there's some more questions, I guess I would just reinforce for anyone that's going to watch this as a recording, we'll put it on YouTube. Again, we'd love to hear from you. I imagine there's going to be more questions as more people watch, or understand this information. So really feel free to email us, feel free to phone us, come and speak with us at the beach this week. This to us is really, the start of this engagement process. I think there's a lot of conversations to come. So we're really open to hearing from you, and we want to hear what you've got to say. There's no more questions coming through in the chat. I can see someone's typing, so we'll give it another minute or so. I think, Pat, are you going to come down? You'll be at the beach on Friday.
Yeah, that's right. So I'll come down on Friday. So anyone who's down on Friday morning, obviously happy to talk about the project to them. And I fully appreciate that this, even though that a decision was made some time ago, sometimes it takes a little bit of time to filter out. So this could be a bit of a shock and a bit of a surprise to people who really value a location. So fully, expect to be able to sort of, speak to people who are a bit upset about this, who are very upset about this. I won't be down on Saturday. I'm sure everyone will sort of respect that we're going to, Luke and his team will be down there just trying to work with you on those sort of things, and we'll look after them as part of that process. In terms of Kirsten, no, Kirsten. So there isn't a proposal for an alternative location near the grain terminal down with CBH. The reason for that is twofold. One is the water starts to become shallow down there, and there's environmental features we need to avoid. The second thing is that after the CBH grain terminal, there will be an expansion of the Kwinana bulk. You've got the Kwinana beach down there, the what's called Wells Park in that location. And then there's immediately next to it, there is our bulk jetty, which is where all of our liquid fertilizer, fuel, all of that sort of thing comes into the state or is exported. And that's obviously key for agricultural imports. Next to that, you have BP's operation with the jetties there. And then north of that, you have the Kwinana bulk terminal. So, while there isn't anything if I could put it this way, solid as a new container terminal, which will be a large reclaimed area, there's actually jetties all the way down there, and there isn't the 180 hectare space, almost the 2 kilometres of space that we would need to put this facility into that location. The other problem there is that there isn't any really solid transport links that come out of there that can cut straight across the Swan Coastal Plain, get to Tonkin Highway, and then create a ring road around Perth for container trucks into the future.
There's a couple more questions I can see coming through. We're just waiting for those. Pat, I wonder if you could even speak to, I guess, the integration between us and Freo Ports, and the way it involves, our proposal involves the redevelopment of the Kwinana bulk terminal.
Yeah, sure. I'll skip that actually, Luke, for now. So Kirsten got your point now. So that's what we really need to work with you on. So I think one of the reasons to come down and speak to you guys on the beach on Friday and Saturday as a first step, and some of the reasons for the surveys. We've got some really good information from those surveys already about what people want in terms of, car parks, around vehicle access, around being able to not have dogs on the beach, or not in fishing, and all of those sort of things. So we've already got a bunch of information from that. We also need to get an understanding. One or two people have said we need 400 metres long, but this is what we need the actual beach into the water to look like. But I think it's really important that we sit down with you as the experts in this and actually really map out what are the places that are going to be suitable for you, and then what are the facilities that you want and everything associated with that, so that we can then sort of take that and then look at the whole coastline up and down and sort of say, well, what can we do about that? So whether it might be down south of the Blue Grain Terminal or in other locations, what we want to do first of all, Kirsten, is understand what it is that makes a successful horse beach, and then we can go and do a mapping of those things around the locations. I mean, people have even suggested new horse beaches, not that this would replace it, that there's a need for them north of Perth. So maybe this could trigger a wider consideration. And Miriam, to your point, the new location for horse beach be available to the community long term. Yes, so that's this exercise. We need to come up with what it is you need, and what it is you want, so that we can then go and look at making sure that there is a location for you to access the beach going forwards. And we'll have to consider through that process how much that can be a dedicated or a shared facility, and with other users. Obviously, some of your colleagues or yourselves have identified the preference for a dedicated horse beach, but there's only so much coastline. So we'll work through that with you over the next couple of months.
There's a couple more questions just coming through. We'll just give it a little bit of time. So Kirsten was just asking, with the 350 responses so far, we should have a good idea of exactly what the community needs. And look, that's true to some extent, Kirsten. We are getting a really good picture, but at the same time, these things take a little bit of time to play out. There's a whole bunch of conversations that we need to be having with local government. We want to make sure this is a solution that is long-term. This isn't sort of a knee-jerk reaction. So we've got a lot of work to do to try and connect the dots within government, with local government, and working with you. So we want to make sure that we wrap our heads around these responses properly, and we plan and we do this properly. And I guess, this isn't going to change overnight. You're not going to lose access in the next few months. This is going to play out over years. So our preference is that we take a little bit of time. We'll be coming back to you probably most likely later in the year, but I think we'll set ourselves up for a good conversation, so that we can get this right for you. Look, if there's no more questions, happy to wrap it up there, but I'm also conscious that, there's a lot we need to talk through, and this might be easier in person. So we're happy to have phone calls. Again, we'll be at the beach Friday, Saturday. We'll be available. You can reach us. We don't want to be hiding from this group. I think there's lots to talk through. So I just want to thank everyone for your time today. Thanks, Pat, for talking us through the information, but thanks to everyone who's tuned in. We look forward to speaking with you over the coming months, and probably likely over the coming years.